in our headlines on this Monday afternoon, November 7th. President Yoon Suk-yeol has apologized for the pain and suffering caused by the Itaewon crowd crush. He's also pledged to reassess broader national safety frameworks. Meanwhile, curtains have gone up on the UN Climate Summit, this time in Egypt, amid desperate calls for climate action as the world, pundits say, is racing against time itself. And a litmus test of sorts is underway for the Biden administration as Americans head to polling stations on November 8th to decide who controls the Congress from here on. We begin with an apology for the loss and grief caused by the Itaewon tragedy and a pledge to reassess national safety mechanisms by President Yoon Suk-yeol earlier on this Monday. Our presidential office correspondent, that is Yoon Jung-min, starts us off.
An apology was how President Yoon Suk-yeol started a safety review meeting on Monday. It's a scene not too unfamiliar in the wake of similar messages sent by the South Korean leader over the past week, but this time it sounded more like a formal apology directed toward the public.
국민의 생명과 안전을 지켜야 하는 대통령으로서 비통하고 마음이 무겁습니다. 말로 다 할 수 없는 비극을 마주한 유가족과 아픔과 슬픔을 함께하고 있는 국민들께 미안하고 죄송한 마음입니다.
He vowed to double down on efforts to ensure no such accident happens again, for which he said the government will completely overhaul existing disaster and safety management systems and take bold action to improve complicated structural issues.
국민 여러분, 정부는 사고 수습과 철저한 진상 규명, 안전 관리 체계의 전반적인 혁신을 통해 안전한 대한민국을 만드는 데 최선을 다하겠습니다. 제가 책임지고 챙기겠습니다.
The meeting largely focused on how to better manage safety where there are large crowds, as well as the first response system. And not just manuals and systems, but the president also stressed the need to properly detect a crisis and promptly report it, calling for more tailored safety rules for subways, malls, stadiums, and concerts. Yoon also signaled a major reform in the way the police handle situations with such risks and promised to get to the bottom of the Itaewon incident and hold accountable those responsible for the major accident. Present at the meeting on Monday were cabinet members, other government officials, and experts from the private sector. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The one-week national mourning to share in the sorrow of the tragic losses of lives in Itaewon came to an end this past Saturday. Our Shin Se-byuk covers that event.
During the one-week period of national mourning that ended Saturday, nearly 118,000 people paid their respects at mourning altars set up across Seoul for the victims of last Saturday's deadly crowd crush. At least 156 people died and almost 200 were injured, most of them in their 20s. The altar at Seoul City Hall was visited by a number of public figures, including South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Seoul Mayor Oh Se-hun. President Yoon paid his respects on each of the 6 official days of mourning. Among the foreign dignitaries who went were German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and former Japanese Prime Minister Taro Aso. On Sunday, President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gon-hee attended a memorial mass at Myeongdong Cathedral. This was the 3rd religious service he's attended in memory of the victims, following a Buddhist service this past week and a Protestant service on Saturday organized by the United Christian Churches of Korea. The mourning altars in Seoul closed on Saturday as of 10 p.m., with one exception, the memorial at Doksapyeong Station near the site of the accident. It will stay open for another week until 10 p.m. on the Saturday the 12th. As of Sunday, funerals have been held for all 130 Korean victims, as have those for 17 foreign victims out of 26. Meanwhile, in the wake of the Itaewon tragedy, the central and regional governments are set to conduct a month-long safety inspection of regional festivals nationwide starting this coming Thursday. They will also look at conditions at certain supermarkets, stadiums, and other attractions. In a meeting Sunday of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters, addressing the Itaewon tragedy, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the government's top priority is to ensure safety in people's everyday lives. In addition to the festival inspection, the government will devise safety guidelines for events like Halloween that don't have official organizers. 신새벽 Arirang News.
A number of the families of the foreign nationals who lost their lives in Itaewon had little time to grieve as they immediately faced the daunting task of flying into the country to take their loved ones back home. That being said, my colleague Yoon shares the story of one such father.
She was young but wise. That's how friends remember Juliana Park, a 25-year-old who died in the Itaewon tragedy. Juliana came to Korea last year. Friends say she was excited to come to her motherland and start a new life. As a Koryo saram, she's ethnically Korean. For 3 generations, her family have been living in Uzbekistan and Russia. Thanks to her outgoing personality, Juliana soon found a job in Korea as a teacher. She made a lot of friends.
It was really interesting to talk to her. In spite of her early age, she was really high educated person. She could give me the good advice. Sometimes I'm just waiting that I will wake up and, oh, it's a nightmare.
Juliana's family didn't have much time to process their emotions. They needed to bring her body back to Russia so her siblings and sick mother could see her for the last time. The only one who could do this was Juliana's father, Arthur Park. He had come to Korea 2 years before Juliana to earn money. But because he isn't fluent in Korean, he didn't know what his options were. At first, because it costs thousands of dollars, he thought he might not be able to send back his daughter's body at all. So he asked friends for help. Many chipped in, but it wasn't enough. That's when his friends opened a donation page for Juliana on Facebook. Since then, Arthur's phone has been ringing non-stop. Total strangers were sending him as much as they could. And so Arthur was able to take care of everything.
전원도 보낸 사람들도 있어. 그 사람한테도 아주 고마워요. 그리고 또 50만 한 사람 보냈는데 거기도 고맙죠.
한 분 한 분 다 기억하시는 거네요.
다 사람들 네.
When officials found out what was happening, they too stepped up. A Russian-speaking employee at South Korea's foreign ministry got in touch with the father and helped him with the paperwork needed to claim some $25,000 promised by the government. These funds go to the families of each victim of the Itaewon tragedy, foreign and Korean alike, to pay for funerals and the repatriation of bodies. Thanks to their efforts, Arthur had access to this money in less than 24 hours. Juliana's body was transported Friday morning under police escort from a hospital in Gyeonggi-do province 3 hours away to Donghae port on the east coast. Arthur rode with us in the van. And at Donghae, he left on a ferry to Vladivostok with his daughter's body. The ferry to Russia takes 17 hours, and it goes only once every Friday. So if it weren't for everyone's help, he would have had to wait another week.
도와준 사람들한테 다 고맙습니다. 도와준 그러면 이거 의문이 못 풀었어.
신예은, Arirang News.
On the defense front, military authorities have kicked off their annual computer-simulated Taegeuk training to bolster defense capabilities against North Korean threats. Now, according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the training will focus on operational capabilities against potential nuclear and missile threats. The operational commands of the Army, Navy and Air Force are taking part in the 4-day exercise. Meanwhile, Seoul is contradicting claims by Pyongyang of having fired 2 cruise missiles last Wednesday into international waters near South Korea's southeastern coast. North Korea's state media on Monday announced that the missiles were launched towards waters 80 kilometers off of South Korea's coastal city of Ulsan. But South Korea's military says no such missiles were detected. North Korea also claimed it had mobilized 500 of its warplanes last Friday, but South Korea detected 180 fighter jets on its radar. In the U.S., voters there will be heading to polling stations on November 8th for the midterm elections, which will decide the fate of the U.S. Congress and, in turn, the Biden administration's future agenda. Our Kim Hyo-sun has details.
U.S. voters are evenly split in their support of Democratic and Republican candidates. According to a Washington Post ABC News poll, 49% of registered voters say they will vote for the Republican candidate in their district, while 48% say they will vote Democrat. Among likely voters, the stats look similar, with 50% in favor of a Republican against 48% for Democrats. The Washington Post further explains that the Democrats need a clear lead in this metric in order to hold off Republican gains. And indeed, at this point, during the 2018 midterm election, Democrats held a 7% advantage on voter intentions. The poll also shows that economic discontent has resulted in the Republicans holding a significant advantage on the bread and butter issues of the economy. 80% of likely voters say the economy is a top issue when considering their vote, and 77% say the same about inflation. The Republican Party leads the Democrats by a dozen or more percentage points when it comes to the voters' trust in terms of handling the economy and inflation. Many media outlets, including Reuters, estimate that it will indeed be a long night, and it could take days to find out whether Republicans or President Biden's Democrats will control Congress. Experts say dozens of races are expected to be close, including key states like Pennsylvania. In a number of states, including Georgia, if a candidate fails to meet the required threshold to claim a victory, the top two candidates go to a runoff election, typically in December. This means that even more time will be needed before the final results are known. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Over in Egypt, the UN summit on climate change is underway after a year of extreme weather events, and related authorities are calling for immediate and credible climate commitment. Our Shin Ha-young has the latest.
The 27th Annual UN Climate Change Conference, or COP27, began on Sunday in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. This year's conference will focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and overseeing the effective adoption of policies aimed at fighting climate change. Among issues being addressed this year is the action needed to respond to record-breaking weather conditions such as drought, heat waves, and floods around the world.
The cascading risks are also clear. So this conference must be about concrete action.
Climate compensation for developing countries will also be on the agenda. This refers to the idea of loss and damage, which suggests that countries contributing most to global warming should pay developing countries that are vulnerable to climate disasters. During last year's conference in Glasgow, the world's climate leaders pledged to phase down coal. However, things haven't been improved. According to the energy think tank Amber, coal power generation had increased about 1% on year by August 2022. This was due to greater coal use in Europe as Russia stopped supplying natural gas to countries in the region. Also, China increased coal consumption following a historic summer drought that hindered the operation of hydroelectric power plants.
COP27 must lay the foundations for much faster, bolder climate action now and in these crucial decades, when the global climate fight will be won or lost.
World leaders from 80 countries, including U.S. President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, are set to attend the climate conference. Na Kyung-won, South Korea's newly appointed special ambassador for climate change, will also be there as South Korea's presidential envoy. Delegates and NGOs from some 200 countries are participating in COP27, which runs through November 18th. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Loss and damage would even be on the
Starting today, that is Monday, bivalent vaccines are being administered to adults aged 18 and above here on the local front. Authorities are calling on all those eligible to get those doses as the daily caseload has been on the rise in recent days. On Monday, Korea reported slightly below 19,000 new COVID-19 infections in light of the weekend factor. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
South Korea has been reporting figures above 2-month highs for new daily COVID-19 cases, with even weekend infections seeing 9-week highs. To prevent a further resurgence in cases, the South Korean government has announced it will begin administering bivalent vaccines for the Omicron variants to all adults 18 and older. This means that bivalent vaccines made by Moderna and Pfizer, which are tailored for the BA.1 variant, will be available to all adults in the country. The vaccine was previously limited to vulnerable groups, such as those aged 60 and over, and workers in nursing hospitals and facilities. However, it's also available for anyone who had their last vaccination at least 4 months ago. The government has been pushing for more people to receive their bivalent vaccines leading into the winter season, as the country has been seeing sluggish vaccination figures. According to the KDCA, only 8.7% of adults 60 and older have been vaccinated with the new Omicron-tailored vaccines. However, watchers say people are waiting for vaccines tailored for the BA.4 and BA.5 variants, which are currently the dominant mutations. Pfizer's vaccine that targets the two dominant strains will be available starting next Monday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, heating expenses have jumped sharply this year. Over the past 7 months, the Korea District Heating Corporation says related costs have risen by around 38%. Compared to October last year, prices were up 20%, the highest on-year gain since the year 2015. Experts link the finding to soaring global energy prices amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Also, on the local front, Naver logged stellar sales for any third quarter this year, driven by its content businesses, including webcomics. The online search giant that would be on Monday said its sales in the third quarter came to over 2 trillion won, or $1.4 billion for the first time in 2 years. Naver's content and commerce businesses played major roles, with content sales jumping more than 77% on year and the commerce sector increasing by almost 19.5%. However, operating profit declined 5.6% on year to about $234 million. Net income stood at $164 million, a drop of 28.3% on year.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Tanzania, over a dozen people have been killed following a plane crash. At least 19 people have been confirmed dead after a Precision Air passenger plane that had been coming from Dar es Salaam plunged into Lake Victoria. The incident occurred while the aircraft was trying to land on Sunday during stormy conditions at Bukoba Airport in Tanzania's northwest. Authorities say the plane suffered technical difficulties due to bad weather about 100 meters from the airport, causing the plane to overshoot the runway and end up in the water. The runway is located on the shores of Lake Victoria, which is Africa's largest lake. Local fishermen initially saved passengers trapped inside the intact plane. According to officials, 26 people of the 43 people on board survived, but rescue operations are still underway. Moving on to Syria now, where 10 people have been killed following the shelling of a displaced residents' camp in rebel-held territory. This, according to local monitoring groups, which added that over 70 were also injured on Sunday in strikes on the Idlib-based camp. Some 30 rockets were fired by the Syrian government, the latest strike in its conflict against rebel forces. It's a violation of the Turkey-Russia brokered truce from 2020, which ended attacks on the last rebel-held region. However, the truce has repeatedly been broken since then. The conflict stems from Syria's civil war, which started over a decade ago, a conflict that has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced some 11 million people. At Twitter last Friday, the anticipated mass axing of employees was set in motion. The company recently bought by Elon Musk said the layoffs may see up to half of Twitter's 7,500 employees lose their jobs. Musk is defending the layoffs, saying in a tweet that Twitter is losing some $4 million a day. He added terminated employees will be provided with 3 months of severance pay. The move comes after the Tesla CEO officially acquired the company over a week ago and is looking to revamp the social media giant. And finally, New York City's annual marathon made a full in-person return over the weekend. Starting from Staten Island and finishing at Central Park, Sunday's race saw over 50,000 people participate. Covering a 42-kilometer course, runners jogged through the city's 5 boroughs of the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island. Evans Chebet and Sharon Lokedi of Kenya crossed the finish line first in the men's and women's races, respectively. The marathon was cancelled in 2020 due to COVID-19 and was limited to 30,000 people in 2021. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. Today is Ipdong on the traditional calendar, marking the start of winter, but winter-like temperatures are not an issue today. Instead, the temperature is expected to vary a lot today, so please dress accordingly so as not to catch a cold. Well, skies are getting murkier in central regions, and an umbrella might be needed. 5 millimeters of rain is forecast for later today to tomorrow morning, which won't be enough to alleviate the dryness. And tomorrow morning, parts of Jeollado province might see some drizzle too. Meanwhile, southern regions where there is no rain forecast are parched with dry air advisory still in place. While highs in central parts are similar to yesterday, reaching 16 degrees in Seoul and 17 in Daejeon. It's slightly higher than yesterday in southern regions, hitting 19 degrees in Gwangju and Busan. From tomorrow, sunny spells should continue for a while. Please take extra precautions to prevent wildfires. And thankfully, nationwide rain is in the forecast this weekend, which will benefit all of us. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
Those are the headlines at this hour, but do stay with us for our panel talk show coming up next. Thank you for now.